Om Tavakatamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavivareditham Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatatadam Bhuvigananti Bhurirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're on the chapter, The Master with the Brahmo Devotees. This is chapter 6, part 1. It is October 28th, 1882. We began the chapter last week, and it was a Saturday. The semi-annual Brahmo festival celebrated each autumn and spring, and this particular time it was being held in Beni Madhav Pal's beautiful garden house at Sinti, about 3 miles north of Calcutta. So this is the same neighborhood where Swami Vivekananda was born and grew up in the northern part of Calcutta. Many of the devotees lived in that area also. So Sri Ramakrishna will be speaking to the Brahmo devotees. Of course, M is there. We don't find, I don't believe, too many other of the close devotees. I don't know if Keshav is probably still quite ill at this time, and Shivnath is there. So this probably means that this is the other group. We know about this split. We were just reading about it the other day, that the group that broke away from Keshav was led mostly by Shivnath Shastri, and he wasn't as appreciative. He couldn't really appreciate Sri Ramakrishna the way that Keshav and Vijay could. Vijay Krishna Goswami, he became the Acharya for that group, but not because he was a little anti-Sri Ramakrishna. That group was a little bit anti, it seems, that they blamed him a little bit for changing Keshav's mind about some things. And anyhow, it sounds like the Shivnath Shastri at that point, after the split, really didn't go to visit Sri Ramakrishna after that. So this will probably be that group that is meeting together. We read also that Narendra, Swami Vivekananda, that he went to this group mainly, but remained on good terms with the Keshav. We go to see him also. So I'm sure there were many who really didn't pay too much attention to that big split. But at this point, Keshav is quite ill, and then within a year or two, Keshav passes away. So this other group probably was a little bit without any great direction or any great leader or anything like that. And then also, shortly after Keshav dies, then Vijay Krishna Goswami, he'll also leave, and he'll take to the path of sannyasa, which means he's no longer a Brahmo. They didn't believe in any of those things. And also went back to the Vaishnava traditions of his forefathers. He was a Goswami. That meant that he could trace his ancestry back to the original founders of the Chaitanya movement, Advaita Goswami, or one of the Goswamis. So Sri Ramakrishna was talking to this group of Brahmo devotees. We don't find Narendra there, or any of the others especially, but he's talking about the 3 gunas. You'll remember we began this last time with regard to the inner nature of people. The gunas are considered to be the constituent elements of nature, prakriti, both external and internal. External nature, Thakur is not paying too much attention to at this time. But the same qualities that define external nature define the mind, internal nature. So, in a, of course, much more subtle way. So if externally we see things that are massive, that are unmoving, mountains and things like that, and that'll be tamas, and it'll be like people who are also idle and lazy and procrastinating and everything. That'll be tamas. And when we see in nature waterfalls and rushing rivers and things like that, this will be rajas. So individuals will also have that. That'll be restlessness and ambitiousness and things like that. And then in nature there'll be sunsets and calm, peaceful times. That'll be sattva. So he's talking about this tamas, rajas, and sattva with regard to the nature of people in general, then with regard to spiritual people, then with regard to spiritual practice, and even with spiritual teachers. So this is what we're in the middle of right now. He's talking about tamas in spiritual life. Of course, he's praising sattvic spiritual people, that they do everything in secret. They don't care if anybody knows, that they spend time in meditation. Very calm, peaceful people and unostentatious. The rajasic devotees, they make a bit of a show about things. And then we expect tamasic devotees to be even worse somehow. But he likes this tamas. This is a very particular type of thing. This he calls the tamas of bhakti. So he'll be praising it a little bit, that is attitude, that dacoit. So we'll get to all of that. So now we're in the middle of this idea that these aspirant have different natures. I'll just read a little bit that we read earlier. An aspirant possessed of rajasic bhakti puts a tilak on his forehead, a necklace of holy rudraksha beads interspersed with gold ones around his neck. In worship he wears a silk cloth. Then he'll get to this tamasic bhakti. A man endowed with tamasic bhakti has burning faith. Such a devotee literally extorts boons from God. Even as a robber falls upon a man and plunders his money, bind, beat, kill. That is the way of the dacoits. Now, with the sattvic devotee, as I said, very calm and peaceful. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, he praises the sattvic devotee. Rajasic devotee, he doesn't praise so much. They're devotees, after all, it's okay. But he's always warning people that don't make a show of your religion, that do things in secret. He makes fun of people who put these big signs and everything. So we're expecting this tamasic bhakti also to be something that Thakur doesn't like too much, but he'll praise it. So he likes this idea of force your demands on God. Just as the dacoits will come and catch somebody and then say, I'll give me all your possessions or I'll kill you. He likes that idea. So we begin. The master was beside himself with love for the Divine Mother. He sang with fiery enthusiasm. If only I can pass away repeating Durga's name. How canst thou then, O Blessed One, withhold from me deliverance, wretched though I may be? Both the English translation of the Gospel and the way M wrote it in the beginning, generally, if he gives a full song one time, then later he'll just give the first few lines, or maybe even one line, something like that. And so this song, we know the song, it goes on and on. Thakur liked this song very much. Then he said, one must take a firm attitude. What? I have chanted the mother's name. How can I be a sinner anymore? I am her child, heir to her powers and glories. This is something that Thakur didn't like, and Swamiji disliked it even more than Thakur. This idea of calling ourselves sinners. And Thakur, he heard this on two fronts. We shouldn't think that this was just when he heard people espousing Christian ideas. Of course, there's a lot of that in Christianity, this original sin and things like that. And Thakur would say, somebody was reading out a book for me, everything was sin and sin, this and that. So this was one thing, but we shouldn't think that it wasn't in any of the Hindu traditions, because the Vaishnava tradition, which emphasized humility so much, also led some of the followers to look upon themselves or think upon themselves or at least say that I am the lowest of the lowly, and a helpless sinner, save me, all of that. And Thakur didn't like that attitude. He said, you keep calling yourself a sinner, you become a sinner. And Swamiji used to say that the greatest sin is calling oneself a sinner, standing liable on humankind. These are very nice statements that he made like that. So, Thakur wanted us to be bold, take that attitude that I may have done something wrong, and that doesn't mean I'm a sinner. We don't want to stamp ourselves with this idea. We want to accept the fact that we make bad decisions sometimes, that we do things out of selfishness, out of greed, out of desire for enjoyment. But all we have to do is say, okay, I made a mistake, I'm going to do my best not to do it again, then we forget it. But the real self, who I really am, is pure and perfect. And Swamiji, of course, emphasized the jnani aspect, that we should tell ourselves, I'm the self. I'm the infinite absolute reality. How can any sin attach itself to me? Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have some bad samskaras that attach themselves to the mind, but these are changeable. This is not who we are absolutely and finally. This is our starting point, and we can change. So Thakur liked this idea. Take this firm attitude. What? I've chanted the mother's name. How can I be a sinner anymore? I am her child, heir to her powers and glories. If you can give a spiritual turn to your tamas, you can realize God with its help. Now, Thakur used to say, give a spiritual turn to all of our passions. More firiye dao. He said, if something is going in one direction, then you spin it around, have it go in the opposite direction. Now, psychologically, this is very brilliant, because we know ourselves. We know that if somebody says, completely eliminate pride, completely eliminate greed, completely eliminate desires, that we'll say it's impossible. So Thakur used to say that with these different types of passions, that we have to find a way to utilize the energy of these in a positive way, to give a new direction to them. So what is greed? It's the desire to have something that we don't possess. So he said, turn that to God, that let yourselves be greedy for God realization, and that way you don't have to try to suppress that feeling of greed, you have to increase it. And then this ego, this sense of I, if the sense of I is there, then at least remove it from I am such a good person, I'm a handsome person, I'm a wealthy person, I'm a powerful person. Get rid of that whole idea. Identify I with one of the attitudes, I'm a child of God, I'm a servant of God. Then feel proud in being that. Take pride in being a servant of God, and increase it. So that way we can utilize something rather than try to stifle it when we know it's not possible. We're pushing it under the surface of the water. The second we let go, it'll pop up again. So there's a very brilliant psychological technique, actually. If you can give a spiritual turn to your tamas, so these are all tamasic types of passions, rajasic and tamasic. The sattvic ones we can just utilize, because these are generally spiritual things. But anything that has to do with lust and anger and greed and pride and jealousy, all of these things, we can utilize them if we can direct them in a spiritual direction. Force your demands on God. He is by no means a stranger to you. He is indeed your very own. Now, Thakur likes this attitude because this was the attitude of the Shaktas. This was the attitude of Ramprasad. This is the attitude of a child. A child can easily force its demands on the mother, and can yell and scream and cry. The mother won't give the child the toy or let it go play. Then it can do all of that. If we have this servant-master relationship, then it's not very appropriate for the servant to do that. But in this particular relationship, which Thakur liked so much, we can do that. We say, Mother, you have to reveal yourself to me. I'm your child. You have to. So this is what he's calling the tamas of bhakti. It's a bit of a tamasic attitude. Who are we to force our demands on anybody? But the child can do it to the mother. So this is giving a turn to tamas. Force your demands on God. He is by no means a stranger to you. He is indeed your very own. Again, you see the quality of tamas. Again, you see, the quality of tamas can be used for the welfare of others. Now he's going to talk about his spiritual teacher also, how they can use this same forceful attitude to help the disciple. There are three classes of physicians: superior, mediocre, and inferior. The physician who feels the patient's pulse and just says to him, "Take the medicine regularly," belongs to the inferior class. Now, everything is going to be upside down here, because if we ask ourselves, what guna is at work here, we have to say that this will be the sattvic physician. He's not very pushy, not very full, kind of a gentle person, but Thakur is going to say he's the worst physician. Yeah. Now, we shouldn't get confused and think that sattva is something inferior. Sattva is the best. Sattva is one step from the roof. But just in this particular case, and with this particular type of example, Thakur is reversing things a little. He's not going to identify him as sattvic, but we can put two and two together and figure it out. So the physician who feels the patient's pulse and just says to him, "Take the medicine regularly," belongs to the inferior class. He doesn't care to inquire whether or not the patient has actually taken the medicine. The mediocre physician, and I'm going to call him Rajasic. This will be Rajas at play. The mediocre physician is he who in various ways persuades the patient to take the medicine and says to him sweetly, "My good man, how will you be cured unless you use the medicine? Take this medicine, I've made it for you." But he who, finding the patient stubbornly refusing to take the medicine, forces it down his throat, going so far as to put his knee on the patient's chest, is the best physician. This is tamas. This time he'll say it. This is the manifestation of the tamas of the physician. It doesn't injure the patient. On the contrary, it does him good. So this is all illustration really for the different types of gurus that we find in the world. Like the physicians, there are three types of religious teachers. The inferior teacher only gives instruction to the disciples, but makes no inquiries about their progress. The mediocre teacher, for the good of the student, makes repeated efforts to bring the instruction home to him, begs him to assimilate it, and shows him love in many other ways. But there is a type of teacher who goes to the length of using force when he finds the student persistently unyielding. I call him the best teacher. So he's utilizing a little bit of this tamas in a very positive way. Now, when we come to our own gurus, we may say to ourselves that our gurus are the worst. They're the worst. Especially in India, they'll give initiation and then they may not even know your name again. You may never see them again. They may not inquire. This is a different scenario. And they'll be praying for the welfare of all of us day and night, whether we know it or not. But they don't place themselves in the category of a Ramakrishna or any of the direct disciples. We're talking now really about those who will have a handful of disciples, and they'll be the very highest caliber of disciples. We're talking about a Sri Ramakrishna or a Swami Vivekananda or Swami Brahmananda, any of the other direct disciples that also have their disciples of a much higher caliber than most of us. So the Guru will know to what extent. We have the story of the Guru pressing the head of the disciple under the water. They won't do it with somebody who they know will simply be content to drown. It has to be somebody who's going to have such a desire for that breath of air that they'll fight the Guru and come to the surface. So a lot of it will be that we ourselves are not the caliber of the disciple, and not just who was the caliber of the Guru. So this will end this little discussion here, because one of the Brahmo devotees is going to change the topic. But this is Thakur trying to tell us that we can utilize human emotions and let them be helpful to us, that we have to be good psychologists with regard to ourselves, and we have to get rid of these feelings of guilt when we find that the mind is tending towards worldly objects and things. We, as human beings, are born with all of these tendencies. And these tendencies are not simply our own personal particular samskaras, which means that, I must have done something bad in the previous lifetime. These are things that come along with the human body. These are things that Ramakrishna himself had to experience when he took a human body. When he took a human body, he understood even the avatar will have to live with the qualities of the human body and some of the qualities of the mind also. So that means when the avatar sees people suffering, that the mind will be affected. And that, of course, the example Thakur always used was that even Rama wept. Yeah, when Sita was captured by Ravana and taken to Lanka, that even Rama wept for Sita. So we shouldn't feel that there's something wrong with us, that we're sinners, this and that. We accept the fact that we have human emotions and that we have human desires and everything, but we understand that we can utilize these things. And it's all a question of practice. It's all a question of practice. When we find the mind going in a direction we don't like, we try to catch it. And we try to remind ourselves that this is not what we're trying to accomplish in this lifetime, that we want to take these same tendencies and turn them into something positive. So we kind of end that discussion here, and we'll get a question that we may wonder why everybody's asking this question and why Thakur is spending so much time on it. We'll get illustrations here that we'll get dozens of times. It'll be repeated dozens of times. The question is, a Brahmo devotee, sir, has God forms or he has none? The Brahmos were almost obsessed with this. And it goes back to a couple of things. One, we generally say that this was British influence and Christian influence, that during that time the British were so much against what they called idol worship. And the Brahmos also, I won't say an imitation of the British, but certainly influenced by them. They couldn't bear this idea of image worship in temples or in homes or anything like that. And generally when they're asking about God with form, that's in the back of their minds. We know this from M's first conversation with Sri Ramakrishna when they're talking about God with form or without form, and M finally blurts out, but shouldn't we tell people not to bow down, not to worship a clay image? That was their conception. When they say that they're against the worship of God with form, it means what they call idol worship. And I don't know how much of this is, and if there's any Muslim influence, but Islam is deadly against this. Deadly against this. You can't have any human representation of God, even symbolic or anything like that. They're very ardent worshippers of formless concept of God, but with a certain conception that God is Father. They have this image of God as Father, maybe with qualities of goodness and love and compassion, but no form and no avatar. Even the Prophet Muhammad One is not allowed to portray him with any human form. They don't even like portraits and things like that. And these recent stabbings and things that took place in France. This all goes back to that same old thing, that caricatures of Muhammad that people are doing, and it's just waving a red flag in front of a bull. I don't know why they do it. It's not respectful under free speech. I understand the concept of free speech, but we should be respectful that people who have this idea that we should refrain from making fun of it. Anyhow, so there are other traditions that were very much against idol worship. Even in Judaism, the very beginning of Judaism, there was worship of the golden calf. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, and he found that some of them had brought a golden calf and were worshiping it, and he saw that these ideas don't leave very easily. So the three main religions of the West, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all anti what we can call the image worship. Now in Christianity, of course, Christ is not the same as an image of God the Father, because that's more on the lines of God as the Son, the incarnation, or the Messiah, however we want to look at it. But even there, we'll find that in Catholic traditions, very often you'll see Christ on the cross, whereas in Protestant traditions, more often, or maybe always, we'll just see the cross without Christ on it. Is that right? Yeah. So, for whatever reason. So they're asking this question. Now, Sri Ramakrishna will answer it. His reference will have nothing to do with the images or idols or anything like that. So we'll understand that his conception of God with form is much more sophisticated and a very beautiful doctrine that he has his way of understanding it, and his understanding that this is applicable to those following the path of devotion. And for those following the path of knowledge, they don't really have to get involved in this concept so much if they don't want to. It's not necessary. That one can think of God as formless. But then he'll say, but then we don't get the full weight. We don't see the beauty of the different types of manifestations. So this is the question, a Brahmo Devotee. Sir, has God forms or has he none? Master, no one can say with finality that God is only this and nothing else. Okay, so we can't put a limit, even in trying to describe a person. We have a friend. Somebody says, what's your friend like? Can we fully describe anyone? We'll miss something. And it'll all be according to the limitations of our understanding. So with regard to God, how much more applicable is this idea that no one can say with finality that God is only this and nothing else. He is formless, and again, he has forms. Now, you remember earlier, I made a reference to a statement Thakur made about God being like water. To me, water is the perfect example of something that can be both formless and yet have form. Perfect example. That not only can it have form, it always has form. And yet it's formless. It has no form of its own, but it always takes a form that whatever the container is, it'll take the form of the container, and the surface of it will always be perfectly horizontal. You will never find a lake that's on an angle. This is just by the force of gravity. This is the way it works. That it'll be perfectly horizontal, and the rest of it, it'll take exactly the form of the bed of the river or the lake or whatever it is. And if we access it, we take it in a pitcher or a bowl or a bucket, the water will take that form. But that form is not essential to it. You pour it from one bucket into a pitcher, and that same water now has the form of the pitcher. Same water. If we freeze it, that's a different story. And we'll get that illustration when it's frozen. But this illustration to me gives us some idea of how the form belongs to it's a quality, but formlessness is the essential quality. And the form that it takes, there's nothing absolute about it. And it'll depend on the container. And the container is the human heart. So however we conceive of God, we're getting the reality. The form is secondary, but not secondary. Because how do we is it like saying that the bucket is very secondary in getting water out of the pond? No, it's critical. But what we want is the water, but we can't do it without the bucket. We can't access God except through this human mind, unless we transcend the mind. We can dive into the ocean, that's a different story. But if we want to access that water, we want to take it, we have to use a container and it'll give it a certain shape. So this is Thakur's understanding of this idea of God with form. For the bhakta, he assumes forms, but he is formless for the jnani. That is, for him who looks on the world as a mere dream. Now, he's not going to say that one is right, one is wrong. This was his understanding that different people have different ways of looking upon one and the same reality. The bhakta feels that he is one entity, that is the devotee, and the world another. Therefore, God reveals himself to him as a person. But the jnani, the Vedantist, for instance. Now remember, Thakur has this terminology. When he talks about Vedanta, he's generally talking about Advaita Vedanta and the Upanishads. We can say, well, isn't Gita part of Vedanta? And Gita is full of talk with personal God. Yes, of course. But Thakur is not using this term Vedanta in that sense. He's using it in a very traditional sense of Veda, Vedanta, Shruti, and Upanishads. When he talks about the Gita, for him, will fall more within the category of what he calls Purana. Its Smriti belongs to Itihasa, but also there's a Krishna and everything. This belongs to the Bhagavata, other Puranas, and that'll be more of either dualistic or qualified non-dualistic. Even though Thakur will say everything ends in oneness. So now we're talking about different conceptions and different paths, not talking about any final type of conclusive position or even realization. Okay, so the bhakta feels that he is one entity and the world another. Therefore, God reveals himself to him as a person. But the jnani, the Vedantist, for instance, always reasons, applying the process of not this, not this. Through this discrimination, he realizes by his inner perception that the ego and the universe are both illusory like a dream. Then the jnani realizes Brahman in his own consciousness. He cannot describe what Brahman is. So, for the jnani, as I say, it's like diving into the ocean. We don't have to think about that I'm separate and I want to realize God as a separate entity, therefore I have to take it out with a certain container, it'll take a certain form. None of that. You remember when Thakur asked Narendra, if you become a fly and there's a cup filled with syrup and you want to drink it, what will you do? And Narendra said, I'll sit on the edge and I'll lean over. And he said, why will you do that? He said, if I fly in the middle, then I'll drown in that nectar. And Thakur said, no, my child, this is the nectar of immortality. If you can't die in that, you'll become immortal in that. So Narendra there was thinking that I'll follow this reasoning that if I want to realize something, that means some separation has to be there. Now remember that the Brahmos were not strict Advaitins, that they weren't always saying I am he. They were worshipping Brahman as God with form, without form, but with qualities. So they didn't really emphasize this idea I am he. So in the beginning, two things Narendra didn't like. One, that I am God, and the other is everything is God. That he would make fun of these ideas, that everything is a manifestation of the Brahman, and ultimately the individual self is one with the Supreme. Of course, that one he very easily realized. It took Thakur's magic touch for him to see everything as a manifestation of consciousness or of Brahman. Okay, so he's saying for the jnani, if this ego disappears, then there's no separation. This is why Thakur ultimately is really a jnani. He's a jnani and a bhakta together. But the dualistic type of bhakta will never be able to say that this ego is just a stick on the ocean of consciousness, making me falsely think that I'm separate from God. The dualist will maintain, no, there's an absolute distinction. That is blasphemy to say that I'm one with God. They'll have to say that if they want to maintain this attitude. For Sri Ramakrishna, it's a choice. I like to feel that way, he used to say. But he could just easily, he could go off and then this ego is gone, and what's left? Only oneness, nothing else is left. So that way he was a real jnani. That, I don't know who said it first, but we have this idea that Swamiji, maybe Swamiji himself probably said it, that externally I am a jnani, but within I'm a bhakta, and that Sri Ramakrishna, externally he was a bhakta, but within he was a jnani. And they were both a perfect blend. Okay, so that's the jnani. And then he says, do you know what I mean? Now instantly he's going to switch to this idea of what does God with form mean for the bhakta? How do we understand that? Do you know what I mean? Think of Brahman, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute, as a shoreless ocean. Through the cooling influence, as it were, of the bhakta's love. So we're starting out with, this is really the conception that the Brahmos had. When they say the God is his ocean of pure consciousness and everything, they didn't say that Brahman alone exists. They say, no, I'm a devotee, I also exist, but I'm worshipping this ocean. I want to meditate upon this ocean. So Thakur is saying that when we think of Brahman, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute, we don't have to say that Brahman alone exists, that the ego is unreal. We can also start out with this idea that yes, my conception of God is one of pure consciousness, an ocean of consciousness. My conception of myself is I'm a devotee. I won't go beyond that. I don't want to heat up my brain with too much deep thinking. I'll simply say, okay, let's just start with that. So he says, through the cooling influence, as it were, of the bhakta's love. Now, the Brahmos were trying to feel this love. It's a little difficult to understand how the Brahman of the Upanishads could be an object of love. It wasn't traditionally. This is why the devotional traditions in Hinduism bring in so much of the avatar. There's Rama and Krishna and everything, with the personality aspect. So it's not simply, we can say, well, in the Upanishad, the Brahman is also the creator. The creator, but still a faceless creator. Nameless and faceless. No stories of playing with gopis or taking a human birth or anything like that. So this will be for the bhakta, and so this will be something very appealing to the Brahmos, that they'll be thinking, yes, this is our conception of Brahman, and at the same time, we want to meditate on that Brahman. We want to worship that Brahman. Through the cooling influence, as it were, of the bhakta's love, the water has frozen at places into blocks of ice. Now, this is going beyond what the Brahmos believe. They'll want to keep this ocean just ocean, formless. They want to keep it formless. Thakur is explaining to them, but don't you know there's some devotees who have such tremendous love for their chosen ideal that they can turn this ocean with formless water into some type of form, not simply the form of the container, but at least in their belief system that it's something that, at least for the time being, maybe in each and every age, will have an actual form. So through the cooling influence, as it were, of the bhakta's love, the water is frozen at places into blocks of ice. In other words, God now and then assumes the various forms for his lovers and reveals himself to them as a person. But with the rising of the sun of knowledge, the blocks of ice melt. Now, there'll be devotees who will say, stop. Stop. You just spoiled the whole thing. What we want to say is that God is manifest in this form and that this is eternal. So Thakur is saying that you may think that, but the mind goes higher and higher and higher, and you melt away and it melts away, and there's only oneness. I know that, I experienced it. But they won't like that idea. So he's now the in-between stage. He's a little bit higher than the Brahmos. They won't like this idea of even temporary form. And the real bhaktas won't like this idea of it melding with the sun of knowledge. He accepts all of them. This three different schools of Vedanta are all represented here. But with the rising of the sun of knowledge, the blocks of ice melt. And then one doesn't feel anymore that God is a person, nor does one see God's forms. What he is cannot be described. Who will describe him? He who would do so disappears. He cannot find his eye anymore. So this is the salt dal at the bottom. Now, I was thinking about this. I do from time to time. And I think that perhaps, of course, using our understanding is extremely helpful, but there's something here that goes beyond all of that. And I think we have to understand that Sri Ramakrishna is speaking out of his own direct experience, and when he's talking about different forms of God, these are things that he experienced in what we call, or what he called, bhava samadhi, or bhava. And without this understanding, we either are stuck with this idea that the forms of God that Thakur is talking about are hallucinations. This is mona bhul. This is the word that Narendra used to use. He would say, sir, these forms of God, all the things you're talking about, you have some problem. There's some hallucination, some mona bhul. This is some mistake in your mind. Thakur would say, oh, really? And then he would go and say, but I talked to Mother, she told me, no, these are real. So we either accept that, or we go to the other extreme and say that if Thakur saw these things, it's because they're real, because they exist. Thakur's mind is going to a different loka. He's ascending to the place where these deities dwell and have their permanent dwelling place, that he's actually seeing them somehow. Who knows? This subtle body leaving, the astral body going and traveling to a different loka and all of that. We can have those types of explanations. The fact that Sri Ramakrishna is having all of these experiences, to me, is one way of understanding that everything we experience in this world is dependent upon the level that the mind is at. And when the mind ascends to a higher plane, we can have different types of visions. Now, are these visions hallucinations? Are they absolutely real? Are they a combination of subjective and objective? This will be our own third-person examination. For those who experience it, they're real. But again, Thakur will say real doesn't mean that absolute. It doesn't mean that everyone will have exactly the same experiences. If something is absolutely real, then everyone will experience it the same way. If there's some subjective element to it, we'll all have our own personalized type of experience when the mind goes higher. Now, those who aren't bhaktas, they may go from our normal consciousness to some type of savikalpa samadhi, to some type of nirvikalpa samadhi. They may have no visions. Not that everyone will have these visions of gods and goddesses. The very curious thing is that Swami Premananda, Baburam, of all the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, he was one of the ones who was most devotional in nature and loving in nature and sensitive, this and that. And yet, he was not having any of these visions. Many of the disciples were having different visions. Even Swamiji, he said, how many visions of Mother Kali have I had? How many mantras shining in gold I've seen? He tells them, but still I have no peace of mind. So this Babu Ram went to Sri Ramakrishna one day and said, sir, everyone is having visions and everything. Why am I the only one not having anything? So Thakur thought, and he said, yeah, a good question. Let me talk to Mother. Huh? So then he went back. He could talk to Mother. And we of course will be the greatest fools in the world if we try to explain it and understand it. But we can't deny it, because he used to say that, but it all turns out to be true, whatever she tells me. So we can't dismiss it very easily. But in any event, he came back to Baburam and said, Mother told me that you won't have visions, you'll have knowledge. And of course that satisfied him to a certain extent, I'm sure. But so it depends on the nature that we have. That some people, they'll have a beautiful picture, and the water they'll take out will take that beautiful shape and form. Others, there's an ocean, it'll form some just block of ice, or almost formless in itself, no special shape. Others, it'll be some exquisite thing. So these have to do with the nature of the devotee also. But the critical thing is that the shape and the form and the name are secondary, in the sense that they will disappear, they'll be different with each and every individual, but essential from the point of view that this is the only way that we can, everything has to take a particular form. There is no such thing as a universal form. Everything has to be one color, or a combination of colors. It can't be all colors. I mean, it can be a tapestry of all different colors, but it has to be one or the other. Something has to be tall or thin or fat or this. It has to be particular. If it's particular, it's particular. Right? Now, that's why if somebody, the person who said, I want my color the color of the liquid in your vat, right, when they're dyeing the cloth. It can't be. You have to want it a particular color, and I'll give you that color. Some people may say, I want my tie dyed. Okay, that can be done, but that's also particular. So, those who want this formless, then they have to take this other attitude. Let this I disappear. Then what remains, remains, and then we can't say anything, we can't experience anything. We'll just be in that state of oneness. So Thakur didn't do that. When he went to that state of oneness, it was generally through bhava samadhi. Generally. That he would be hearing a song of the Divine Mother and thinking of the Divine Mother, and would have to go through, that would be his Savikalpa Samadhi. It's not the Savikalpa Samadhi of the Yoga Sutras. That there's no form, only a little sense of I remains. But with Thakur, he would go through this realm of gods and goddesses. Are they real or are they unreal? Who can say? Real, of course, but permanently real. That's a different question. Real, the block of ice is real. It's water. It's real. Is the form real? Well, temporarily. And is it of any importance? Of great importance. This is what the devotee wants to see. And Thakur, he has this play between subjective and objective. Sometimes it's based on the desire of the heart of the devotees. Sometimes, because of the desire of the devotee, God will reveal himself in that form. My child wants to see this form. We'll get later this idea when Hanuman went to Dwaraka. And I don't know how he did it. They're in different yugas. Huh? When he was with Rama in one yuga. When he's to visit Krishna, another yuga. Anyhow, he went there, and Rukmini was there and said to Krishna, Hanuman is coming to see you. You better take your form of Rama. He won't be happy unless he sees you in the form of Rama. So, same God, but desire to reveal himself to the devotee in the form that the devotee wants to see. That makes it a little bit on the objective side. The other one is more subjective. I'm the one who's created this container. The water will take that shape. There's my desire to see God in that form will allow me to see God in that form, not force God to reveal himself. Now, which is true? And God knows which is true. It's a play between objective and subjective. Now, he's going to go back and forth between the devotee and the jnani. It's a very interesting conversation. Now he says, let me go back. With the rising of the sun of knowledge, the blocks of ice melt. Then one doesn't feel anymore that God is a person, nor does one see God's forms. What he is cannot be described. Who will describe him? He who would do so disappears. He cannot find his I anymore. Now he'll go back to the jnani and talk about this I. What do we mean by I? If one analyzes oneself, one doesn't find any such thing as I. Now, suppose that people ask this question, is the ego real? What will Thakur say? Is the ego real? Kumar? Yes and no. Huh? It's real, we can't get rid of it, very hard to get rid of it. Is it absolutely real? No. And if it's our sense of I, is it flexible? Is it adjustable? Is it fluid? It's very fluid. Is it constantly changing? Can it disappear? Yes. Can it reappear? Yes. This is the nature of this ego. That's the reality of it. Is it absolutely real? No. This is what he will say. So he says, if one analyzes oneself, one doesn't find any such thing as I. Now he's talking from the point of view of the jnani. There'll be many times when he'll say that you can analyze yourself as much as you want. Do it 1,000 times. The second you stop analyzing, it comes back. But he's not going to emphasize that here. He says, take an onion for instance. This is our Panchakosha doctrine. With a very simple illustration. First of all, you peel off the red outer skin. This will be our Annamaya Kosha. This will be the physical body. Then you find thick white skins. These will be the inner ones. Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha. Peel these off one after another. Then we get to this Anandamaya Kosha. And you won't find anything inside. Now, this very nice doctrine, it starts out with a misconception. It starts out with a misconception that I am an individual. This I is something real. I am an individual who is covered by this body, mind, senses, all of these different things. If I want to get to that individual within, I remove all of these things until I find that individual there. It's like I know that there's a pearl inside of this oyster. I have to open the shell and I go in and I search and I find the pearl there. So we have this idea that we want to find that real self. Who am I? That real self within. I'm not this body, not the mind. We peel everything away. When we get to the very last and we peel it away, then we find that there's nothing there. Emptiness. That little space that we talk about, space in the heart. The dimensions of that space are a product of falsely identifying with the coverings. Once we remove the coverings, whether what used to look like a square inch of space, now we find is infinite space. Is one with all of space, each and every one of us. There's no distinction. It's absolute. There is no I. When the false identification is eliminated, then there's nothing for it to identify with. We can't even say that I am Brahman. We can't say that at that point. The I is gone. We say I am Brahman when we're trying to get there. Once we get there, then silence. We can't say anything. So if one analyzes oneself, so this peeling off is saying, am I this physical body? Body is constantly changing. I'm observing this body. I can't be this body. We do that with all of them. Even the mind. I am the witness of the mind. I am observing the mind. And then this ego. I've been watching this ego sometimes get inflated, sometimes get deflated, sometimes get bruised, sometimes sticking out his chest. I've been observing it throughout my life, and it's gotten me in so much trouble. So I'm not that. I'm the observer of all of these things. But once we get rid of everything, we can't even say I'm the observer. Even that ego which is a type of ego. This is an ego also, but a ripe one. Even that disappears. So in that state, so this means that that state of oneness. We may say samadhi if we like, or just that state where we don't find anything, any I inside. In that state, a man no longer finds the existence of his ego. And who is there left to seek it? The seeker is also the ego. The witness of everything is not seeking anything. It's perfectly content. We can't even say perfectly content. It simply is. Who can describe how he feels in that state, in his own pure consciousness, about the real nature of Brahman? Now we get the salt doll. Once a salt doll went to measure the depth of the ocean, no sooner was it in the water than it melted. Now who was there to tell the depths? Now sometimes Thakur will say, by the time it gets to the bottom, it's completely disappearing. That means as we get deeper and deeper, this sense of ourselves as a person starts to get thinner and thinner and dissipate and subtler and subtler, and then by the time at the bottom, there's no one there to even ask that question. There is a sign of perfect knowledge. Man becomes silent when it is attained. Capital I-T, this will be Brahman. Then the I, which may be likened to the salt doll, melts in the ocean of existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute, and becomes one with it. Not the slightest trace of distinction is left. So this ego, this sense of I, is what causes us to feel all types of distinctions between ourselves and others, between ourselves and God, between our own ethnic groups and racial groups and all of that. It all goes back to what we identify with. Thakur's understanding of the ego was very much similar to Freud and a lot of the Western psychologists. The ego is self-image. That's all that it is. It's our own self-image. And it can be wrong. It can be completely wrong. Sometimes we're the worst judge of ourselves. We think we're worthless people. We're good people. But that's our sense of I. It's just a sense of I. And that's why it's not ultimately real, why it's constantly changing. The real I is that indwelling divine presence. The real higher self, that's the real I, which manifests within as the witness. When it's not functioning as the witness, then it's that son of Brahman, that pure S-U-N, that pure son of Brahman. As long as his self-analysis is not complete, man argues with much ado, but he becomes silent when he completes it, when the empty pitcher has been filled with water. This is a nice illustration. When the water inside the pitcher becomes one with the water of the lake outside, no more sound is heard. When we put the pitcher in, there'll be some glub, 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 and it fills up, you take it out, then nothing. Sound comes from the pitcher as long as the pitcher is not filled with water. Thakur used to get into arguments with Dr. Sharkar. He would say, then why do you talk so much? He would say, sometimes again, if you want to pour that water into somebody else's pitcher, it'll make a little sound again. People used to say in olden days that no boat returned after having once entered the black waters of the ocean. Kalopani. That means that once attaining this ultimate realization of Brahman and melting and become one with it, there's no coming back from that state. Yeah, actually, when Thakur talks about anybody returning from samadhi, this, it seems, was not the prevalent idea at the time. It seems that people mostly felt that if one entered into nirvikalpa samadhi, that one wouldn't return from it. So Thakur was kind of arguing against that idea. No, that there are some who can come back down from that state, that there are some who won't get so deeply merged in it that the mind won't come down again. So he said people used to say in olden days that no boat returns after having once entered the black waters of the ocean. All troubles and botheration come to an end when the I dies. So this is not just a philosophical statement. This because this ego, we have to remember this ahankara. It has two meanings. One, philosophically, what is this sense of I that we have? The other is pride. Ahankara means pride. When we can get rid of this pride that we're such wonderful people and everyone should show us proper respect, if we can get rid of that, then life will become very free from trouble. So all trouble and botheration come to an end when the I dies. But, this is what I mentioned earlier, you may indulge in thousands of reasonings, but still the I doesn't disappear. For people like you and me, now look at Thakur, people like you and me, it is good to have the feeling I am a lover of God. So this was something that Thakur liked, this idea that it may not be absolutely real, this sense of I, but it's persistent. If it's persistent, then let's utilize it. Let's turn this I into a lover of God, have some type of relationship. Then we'll see that this is how one enjoys divine communion, because of this sense of I. Okay, so we'll stop here. That was page 149. Still with the Master and the Brahmo Devotees. This will go on for quite a bit. Okay, then we'll close with our closing prayer. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukham Bhathurvikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamhidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namah. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Thank you, everyone. And if you didn't see or Durga Puja, and if you don't know, there's a beautiful vocal concert at the end by Subhadra Desai. She did it just for us. And if you don't want to see the whole puja, you can just scroll forward, and the last hour you'll be able to watch and listen to the beautiful performance that she did for us. So I thank all of you, and we will see you next time.